I was sitting in the doctor's office, tapping my foot against the cold linoleum floor, waiting for the results of what I thought was just a routine checkup. The air was thick with that sterile antiseptic smell that always made me feel slightly on edge. The door swung open and Dr. Patel walked in, her expression warm but serious. "Lila," she said, settling into her chair. "I have some news that might come as a surprise." I braced myself, suddenly aware of the tightness in my chest. "Okay, hit me with it." "You're pregnant." The words hung in the air, echoing in my mind like a bell tolling in the distance. Pregnant. I was pregnant. I felt a rush of emotions, joy, fear, confusion, all crashing into each other like waves in a storm. I'd always wanted to be a mother, but Caleb and I had talked about waiting a few more years. I could already hear his voice, cool and dismissive, echoing in my head. I thanked Dr. Patel, my mind spinning as I left the office. The drive home was a blur, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. I kept glancing at my reflection in the rearview mirror, searching for some sign of change, some clue that my life had just shifted on its axis. When I walked into our apartment, Caleb was sprawled on the couch, his laptop balanced on his knees. He looked up, his eyes flickering with the briefest hint of curiosity before settling back into their usual indifference. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." "Can it wait?" he asked, not bothering to look up this time. "I'm in the middle of something." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "No, it can't wait," he sighed, closing the laptop with a pointed click. "All right, what's up?" "I'm pregnant." For a moment there was silence. Then a slow, creeping smile spread across his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Wow, that's unexpected." "Unexpected," I echoed, feeling a knot of frustration tighten in my chest. "Is that all you have to say?" He shrugged, leaning back into the couch. "I mean, we talked about this, Lila. We agreed it wasn't the right time." "I know," I replied, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and vulnerability. "But life doesn't always go according to plan." Caleb stood up, running a hand through his hair, his expression unreadable. "This changes everything, you know. We'll have to rethink our plans, maybe even put some things on hold." I watched him, feeling the first pangs of isolation creeping in. This was supposed to be a moment of shared excitement, a step forward in our lives together. Instead, it felt like I was standing on the edge of a chasm, and Caleb was already turning away. "Do you even want this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, and that pause spoke louder than any words could. "I just need some time to think." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah, okay." As Caleb disappeared into the bedroom, I sank onto the couch, staring at the blank television screen. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, but one thing was clear. I was in this alone, at least for now. Later that night, as I lay in bed, listening to Caleb's steady breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. A crack had appeared in the foundation of our marriage, and I had no idea how to fix it. I closed my eyes, trying to find some comfort in the darkness, but all I could see was the uncertain future stretching out before me. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for the life growing inside me. Caleb would have to come around eventually, right? But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder, what if he didn't? What if this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something I wasn't prepared for? Questions swirled in my mind, unresolved and persistent as I slipped into a restless sleep, leaving me with a sense of unease that I couldn't quite shake. The morning after my conversation with Caleb, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, scrutinizing the faint lines around my eyes. I felt older, somehow, as if the weight of the news had etched itself into my skin overnight. I needed to tell Eleanor, Caleb's mother. She was the kind of woman who liked to know everything about her family, preferably before anyone else did. I called her that afternoon, my stomach fluttering with nerves. Eleanor picked up on the second ring, her voice crisp and expectant. "Lila, dear, what a surprise." To what do I owe this pleasure? Hi, Eleanor. I have some news I thought you'd want to hear directly from me. Oh. Her tone was polite but edged with curiosity, like a cat that had just caught sight of a mouse. I'm pregnant. There was a pause, long enough for me to imagine her expression, eyebrows raised. Lips pursed in that familiar way she had when she was trying to mask her true feelings. Well, that's certainly unexpected, she finally said, echoing Caleb's sentiments from the night before. Have you and Caleb discussed how this will impact his career? His career. Of course, it always came back to that. We're working through it, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Good. It's important to stay focused on what matters. A baby is a big responsibility, Lila, and I hope you're prepared for that. I am, I said, trying not to let her words sting. We both are. We hung up soon after, the conversation leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I felt more alone than ever, caught between Caleb's indifference and Eleanor's thinly veiled criticism. I needed to clear my head, so I decided to meet Zoe for coffee. Zoe greeted me with a hug that was warm and reassuring. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, pulling back to study my face. I managed a weak smile. I think I'm living with one. We sat down and I filled her in on everything. Caleb's reaction, Eleanor's cold reception. Zoe listened intently, her eyes narrowing with every word. That's just like them, she said, shaking her head. Always so focused on themselves. What about you, Lila? How are you holding up? I shrugged, staring into my coffee. I'm trying to be optimistic, but it's hard when it feels like I'm the only one who cares. Zoe reached across the table, giving my hand a squeeze. You're not alone. I'm here and I'll help you through this. Her words were a balm, soothing the raw edges of my anxiety. But as we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was brewing beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A few days later, I decided to cut back on my hours at work. I hoped it would give me more time to focus on my health and maybe, just maybe, ease some of the tension at home. When I told Caleb, he looked at me like I'd suggested we sell the house and move to Mars. You're cutting back? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Isn't that a bit premature? I thought it might help, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Less stress for both of us. He shook his head, a disapproving frown creasing his forehead. It just seems like you're giving up, Lila. We need to be strong right now. The irony of his words was not lost on me. I'm trying to be strong, I replied, biting back the urge to say more. I just thought. Maybe think a little less, he interrupted, his tone sharp. We've got enough on our plates. I nodded, swallowing my retort. It was easier than starting another argument, especially when I knew it would lead nowhere. But his words lingered, gnawing at my resolve. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Caleb had been distracted lately, more so than usual. And then there was Eleanor's cryptic comment about his career. It was like I was piecing together a puzzle, but half the pieces were missing. The next morning, as Caleb left for work, I noticed something odd. His phone, usually glued to his side, was left charging on the kitchen counter. It was a small thing, but it struck me as unusual. I picked it up, hesitating for a moment. Then, driven by a mix of curiosity and something deeper, I unlocked it. What I found was unexpected. A message from an unknown number, signed with a single initial, M. Looking forward to tonight. Can't wait to see you. M. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, the implications sinking in. This was more than just a crack in the foundation. It was a chasm, threatening to swallow everything I thought I knew. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. This was the twist I hadn't seen coming, a revelation that turned my world upside down. I had to know the truth, and I had to know it now. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, my mind replaying the message from Caleb's phone over and over. The initial shock had worn off, leaving behind a simmering anger that I couldn't quite shake. I knew I had to act, but I wasn't sure how. That's when I decided to call Ian, my detective friend. Ian picked up on the first ring, his voice steady and reassuring. "Lila, what's up?" "I need your help," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I think Caleb's cheating on me." There was a pause, then Ian's voice came back, calm and professional. "Tell me everything." I recounted the late nights, the secretive behavior, and finally the message. Ian listened without interrupting, letting me get it all out. "Do you want me to look into it?" he asked once I'd finished. "Yes," I replied, my resolve hardening with each word. "I need to know the truth." "All right, I'll see what I can find." After hanging up, I felt a small sense of relief. Ian was good at what he did, and if there was something to uncover, he'd find it. But as the day wore on, my relief turned to anxiety. What if Caleb found out? What if I was wrong? That evening, Caleb came home later than usual, his tie askew and his eyes tired. He barely glanced at me as he walked past, heading straight for the shower. I watched him go, my heart heavy with unanswered questions. When he finally emerged, I decided to test the waters. "Long day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," he replied, rubbing his neck. "Lots of meetings. Anything interesting?" I pressed, searching his face for any hint of deception. "Not really," he said, his eyes flicking away from mine. "Just the usual." I nodded, biting back the urge to confront him. Instead, I turned back to my book, pretending to read while my mind raced with possibilities. The next few days passed in a tense blur. Caleb's behavior didn't change. If anything, he seemed more distant, more preoccupied. I kept waiting for Ian to call, each ring of the phone sending my heart into overdrive. Finally, the call came. Ian's voice was low, almost apologetic. "Lila, I found something." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" "He's been seeing someone," Ian said, his words careful and measured. "Her name's Marissa Lane. They've been meeting at a hotel downtown." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Marissa, the initial from the message. It was all real, and it was worse than I'd imagined. "Thank you, Ian," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want me to keep digging?" he asked, his tone gentle. "No," I replied, my mind made up. "I've heard enough." After hanging up, I sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. I needed to confront Caleb, but the thought of it filled me with dread. How could he do this to us? To me? That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Caleb slept beside me. My mind was a whirlwind of anger and betrayal, but beneath it all was a deeper, more unsettling question. What was I going to do now? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. I needed to talk to Zoe. She'd always been my rock, and I knew she'd help me figure out my next steps. We met at a small cafe, the kind with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. Zoe listened as I recounted Ian's findings, her expression growing darker with each word. "That bastard," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I knew he was trouble." "What do you do, Zoe?" I asked, feeling more lost than ever. "You confront him," she replied, her eyes blazing with determination. "You deserve answers, Lila." I nodded, taking comfort in her unwavering support. But as I left the cafe, a new thought occurred to me. What if confronting Caleb wasn't enough? What if I needed to do more to protect myself and my future? The idea of revenge flickered in the back of my mind, a dangerous temptation that I couldn't quite ignore. I'd always believed in justice, in doing what was right. But this situation was testing everything I thought I knew. As I walked home, I realized that my understanding of justice was evolving. It wasn't just about getting answers or confronting Caleb. It was about reclaiming my life, my happiness, and my sense of self. And if that meant taking drastic measures, then so be it. With each step, I felt a new resolve building within me. Caleb had made his choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let him control my life any longer. I spent the next few days in a fog, my mind replaying the conversation with Ian and the images it conjured of Caleb and Marissa together. The betrayal was a living thing, gnawing at my insides and making it hard to focus on anything else. I knew I had to confront Caleb, but the thought filled me with dread. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Caleb walked in, his face a mask of practiced normalcy. I watched him from the corner of my eye, my heart pounding in my chest. It was time. "Caleb," I said, setting the knife down with a deliberate clatter. "We need to talk." He paused, a hint of irritation flashing across his face. "Can it wait? I've had a long day." "No, it can't," I replied, my voice firm. "I know about Marissa." Color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and exposed. For a moment, he said nothing, just stared at me as if I'd slapped him. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said, his voice tight. "Don't lie to me, Caleb," I said, crossing my arms over my chest. "I've seen the messages. I know about the hotel." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "It's not what you think," he said at last, but the words rang hollow. "Then tell me what it is," I challenged, my anger bubbling to the surface. He hesitated, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. "It's complicated," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Complicated?" I echoed, my heart aching with the weight of his betrayal. "You're cheating on me, Caleb. There's nothing complicated about that." He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. "That's not good enough." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a hard, defensive edge. "We can work through this," he said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "We can fix it." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the kitchen walls. "Fix it? How do you fix something like this, Caleb?" He took a step toward me, his hands outstretched. "I'll end it with Marissa. I promise." I studied him, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that we could somehow salvage our marriage. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger with each new revelation, knew that it wasn't enough. "I need time," I said, stepping back. "Time to think." He nodded, relief washing over his face. "Of course. Take all the time you need." As he left the room, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a flicker of something else. Empowerment. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control of my own life. The next day, I met with Zoe again, needing her perspective to help me sort through the chaos. We sat on a park bench, the autumn leaves swirling around us like confetti. "So, what's the plan?" Zoe asked, her eyes sharp and focused. "I don't know," I admitted, staring at the ground. "Part of me wants to fight for this, for us. But another part of me is just done." Zoe nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You have to do what's right for you, Lila. Not for him, not for anyone else." "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But it's not that simple." She reached over, squeezing my hand. "You're stronger than you think. Whatever you decide, I'll be here." As we sat there, a new thought began to take shape in my mind. Maybe this wasn't just about Caleb's betrayal. Maybe it was about something bigger. About reclaiming my life, my happiness, and my sense of self-worth. The idea of revenge still lingered, but it was shifting, evolving into something else. Maybe the best revenge wasn't about hurting Caleb or Marissa. Maybe it was about finding my own path, one that didn't involve them. With that realization, I felt a sense of clarity, a new determination to take control of my future. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let Caleb or anyone else dictate my life any longer. Conference was being held at a sleek hotel on the outskirts of town, its glass facade glinting in the afternoon sun. As I approached, my heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. I had to see it for myself, to confront Caleb and Marissa in their deceit. I slipped through the lobby, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The elevator ride to the conference floor felt interminable, each ding marking a step closer to a confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. When the doors finally opened, I hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady myself. I could hear the murmur of voices and the clinking of glasses from the reception area. I moved forward, scanning the room for Caleb. And then I saw them. Caleb and Marissa stood together, their heads bent close in conversation. They were laughing, oblivious to the world around them. My heart twisted painfully at the sight, the reality of their betrayal hitting me like a physical blow. I walked over, my steps purposeful, my resolve hardening with each stride. Caleb looked up as I approached, his smile freezing on his face. Marissa turned, her expression shifting from surprise to something more calculating. "Lila," Caleb said, his voice tinged with a nervous edge. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Marissa's eyes flickered with something like amusement. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us, Lila." "I wasn't invited," I said, my gaze fixed on Caleb. "But I thought I'd drop by and see what you've been up to." Caleb shifted uncomfortably, his hands slipping into his pockets. "Lila, this isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because it looks like you're here with her, not at a conference." Marissa smirked, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "Caleb, maybe we should tell her the truth." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What truth?" Caleb hesitated, his eyes darting to Marissa before returning to me. "I was going to tell you, Lila. Tell me what?" I demanded, my patience wearing thin. Marissa stepped forward, her expression triumphant. "Caleb and I are planning to be together. After the baby is born, he's leaving you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, my breath catching in my throat. "Is that true, Caleb?" He looked away, his silence more damning than any words could have been. I felt a surge of anger, my vision blurring with unshed tears. "You coward," I spat, my voice trembling with rage. "You couldn't even tell me yourself." Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it. I've heard enough." I turned on my heel, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. As I left the room, I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I needed to get out of there, to clear my head. I found myself outside, the cool air a balm against my heated skin. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts racing. I'd known Caleb was unfaithful, but hearing him confirm it, hearing their plans for the future, was a blow I hadn't anticipated. I stopped by a park bench, sinking down onto the worn wood. My mind was a jumble of anger, betrayal, and something else, relief. In a way, their admission had freed me. I no longer had to pretend, to hope for something that was never going to happen. But as I sat there, another thought occurred to me. What if this wasn't just about Caleb and Marissa? What if there was more at stake? The idea of revenge flickered in the back of my mind, a dangerous temptation that I couldn't quite ignore. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed Zoe's number. She picked up almost immediately, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. "Lila, what's wrong?" "I need your help," I said, my voice steady despite the tumult inside. "I need to figure out how to protect myself." Zoe was silent for a moment, then her voice came back, firm and reassuring. "Whatever you need, I'm here." As I hung up, I felt a new resolve building within me. Caleb and Marissa had made their choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let them dictate my life any longer. It was time to take control, to fight back, and to reclaim what was rightfully mine. With that thought in mind, I stood up, my path clear before me. Whatever happened next, I was ready. The days after the conference were a blur of raw emotions and sleepless nights. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. The betrayal, the lies, it was all too much. I was barely holding it together, the weight of it all pressing down on me. One morning, I woke up feeling off, a dull ache in my abdomen that I couldn't ignore. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just stress. But as the day wore on, the pain intensified, sharp and unrelenting. I knew something was wrong. I called Zoe in a panic, my voice trembling as I explained what was happening. She insisted on taking me to the hospital, her concern palpable over the phone. Within minutes, she was at my door, her face a mask of worry. The hospital, the sterile white walls, and the hum of machinery did little to calm my nerves. The doctor's expression was grave as he delivered the news. I was losing the baby. The words hit me like a sledgehammer, knocking the breath from my lungs. I felt a numbness spread through me, a cold detachment that belied the turmoil inside. Zoe held my hand, her eyes filled with unshed tears, but I couldn't cry. I couldn't feel anything at all. As I lay there, the reality of my situation crashed over me in waves. I had lost the baby, and with it, the last thread of hope that had been holding me together. Caleb's betrayal, the end of our marriage, it all seemed insurmountable now. When I finally returned home, the apartment felt different, empty and foreign. I wandered through the rooms, touching the familiar objects that now seemed to belong to someone else. I found myself in the nursery, the room we'd never gotten around to decorating. It was a stark reminder of everything I'd lost. Caleb came home later that evening, his face drawn and weary. I could see the guilt etched into his features, but I couldn't bring myself to care. We sat across from each other, the silence heavy and oppressive. "I heard about the baby," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to find the words. "I'm sorry, Lila. I never meant for any of this to happen." His apology rang hollow, a meaningless gesture that did nothing to ease the pain. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man I'd once loved, now a stranger. "I don't know what to say, Caleb," I replied, my voice flat. "It's too late for sorry." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the distance between us insurmountable. "I'm leaving," I said, the decision crystallizing in my mind. "I can't do this anymore." His eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. "Lila, wait. We can work through this." "We can." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "We can't. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." As I spoke, I felt a strange sense of calm, a clarity that had been absent for so long. I was done fighting for something that was never going to work. It was time to let go, to find my own path. The next few days were a whirlwind of packing and goodbyes. Zoe was a constant presence, her support unwavering as I prepared to leave the life I'd known. As I packed the last of my things, I found a letter tucked into one of Caleb's drawers. It was from Marissa, detailing plans to exploit Eleanor's finances to fund their new life together. The revelation was a final, bitter blow, confirming everything I'd feared about Caleb's intentions. I knew I had to tell Eleanor, to warn her before it was too late. I met Eleanor at a quiet cafe, the air thick with unspoken tension. She looked at me with a mixture of skepticism and concern, her eyes searching mine for answers. "What's this about, Lila?" she asked, her voice sharp. I slid the letter across the table, watching as her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Caleb and Marissa are planning to use your assets to fund their life together," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She stared at the letter, her hands trembling. "I can't believe this," she murmured, her voice breaking. "My own son." "I'm sorry, Eleanor," I said, reaching out to touch her hand. "I thought you should know." As we sat there, a new understanding passed between us, a bond forged in shared betrayal. I realized then that my ideas of revenge had shifted. It wasn't about getting even, it was about protecting those who still mattered. As I left the cafe, I felt a sense of closure. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was ready to face it. I had lost so much, but I had also found something invaluable, myself. And that was a start. Confrontation with Eleanor had left me drained, but it had also given me a sense of purpose. I knew what I had to do next. The truth about Caleb and Marissa's plans was out in the open, and it was time to face them both head-on. I decided to meet Caleb at our apartment, the place that had once been a home and now felt like a battleground. I waited for him to return, the silence of the room pressing in on me as I rehearsed what I would say. My heart was a drumbeat of anxiety and determination. When Caleb finally walked through the door, his expression was a mixture of surprise and apprehension. He must have sensed that something was different, that I was different. "Lila," he said, setting his briefcase down. "What's going on?" I stood up, meeting his gaze with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. "We need to talk." He nodded, a wary look in his eyes. "All right." I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know about your plan with Marissa. To use Eleanor's money." His face blanched, the color draining away like water from a sieve. "Save it," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "I've already told Eleanor." His eyes widened, panic flickering across his features. "You did what?" "You heard me," I said, crossing my arms. "I told her everything." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, his movements agitated. "Lila, you don't understand." "No, Caleb. You don't understand," I snapped, my voice rising. "You've been lying and manipulating everyone around you. And for what? To run off with Marissa." He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off again. "I've lost everything because of you. The baby, our marriage, my trust. And now you want to destroy your mother's life too." Caleb's shoulders slumped, a defeated look settling over him. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Yet here we are," I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. "It's over, Caleb. You've lost everything." He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved. But it was too late for regrets, too late for apologies. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I want you to leave," I said, the words coming out with a finality that surprised even me. "I want you to leave and never come back." He nodded, a resigned acceptance in his eyes. "All right." As he turned to go, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a newfound sense of freedom. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. But just as he reached the door, it swung open to reveal Marissa, her expression one of smug satisfaction. "I see you've finally grown a backbone, Lila," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I bristled at her words, my anger flaring anew. "And I see you're still as deluded as ever, Marissa." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, please. Caleb was never yours to keep." "Maybe not," I replied, taking a step forward, my gaze steady. "But he's not yours either." "Not anymore." Marissa's smile faltered, a flash of uncertainty crossing her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean that it's over," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. "You've both lost." Caleb looked between us, his face a mask of confusion and regret. "Marissa, maybe we should." "No," she snapped, her eyes flashing. "We're not done here." "Yes, we are," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You can't manipulate your way out of this one, Marissa. It's time to face the consequences." As the words left my mouth, I saw the realization dawn on her face, the understanding that her plans had crumbled. She turned to Caleb, her expression pleading. "Caleb, we can still." But he shook his head, a weary resignation in his eyes. "No, Marissa. It's over." With that, he walked past her, out the door, leaving her standing there, alone and defeated. I watched him go, a sense of closure settling over me. Marissa looked at me, her bravado gone, replaced by a hollow vulnerability. "You think you've won, Lila?" I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. This was never about winning. It was about doing what's right. As she left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Confrontation had been painful, but necessary. I had faced my greatest challenge and come through stronger for it. Standing there in the quiet aftermath, I understood that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about finding peace, about reclaiming my life and moving forward. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to do just that. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of change and reflection. I moved into a small apartment, a cozy space that felt like a fresh start. It was a blank canvas, waiting for me to fill it with new memories and new beginnings. I spent my mornings at the school, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of my work. Helping others navigate their challenges gave me a sense of purpose, a reminder that life continued to move forward no matter how heavy the past. Eleanor reached out to me a few days later. We met at a small cafe, the same one where I'd shown her the letter. This time, the atmosphere was different, less tense, more hopeful. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Eleanor began, her voice steady but soft. "About Caleb and Marissa." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've decided to cut Caleb off financially," she said, her eyes meeting mine with a resolute determination. "He needs to learn that actions have consequences." I felt a surge of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Eleanor." "I know that wasn't easy." She sighed, a hint of sadness in her smile. "It's the right thing to do." "I see that now." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our coffee. Then Eleanor reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "I'm sorry, Lila. For everything. I should have seen what was happening sooner." Her apology was unexpected, and it touched me deeply. "We all make mistakes," I said, squeezing her hand. "The important thing is what we do next." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm proud of you, Lila. You've shown incredible strength." As we parted ways, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Eleanor's support meant more than I'd realized, and it marked a new chapter in our relationship, one built on mutual respect and understanding. Back at my apartment, I found Zoe waiting for me, a bottle of wine in hand. "Thought you could use a drink," she said with a grin. I laughed, grateful for her unwavering friendship. "You know me too well." We settled onto the couch, the wine flowing and our conversation easy and light. Zoe's presence was a balm, her laughter infectious and comforting. "So, what's next for you?" she asked, her eyes curious and supportive. I leaned back, considering her question. "I don't know," I admitted. "But for the first time, I'm okay with that. I'm just going to take it one day at a time." Zoe nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sounds like a plan." As the evening wore on, I found myself reflecting on the journey I'd been through. The betrayal, the loss, the confrontation, it had all been painful, but it had also led me to this moment. A moment where I felt stronger, more self-assured, and ready to embrace whatever came next. The resolution wasn't perfect. There were still loose ends and unanswered questions. Caleb and Marissa were out of my life, but their shadows lingered, reminders of the past that had shaped me. Yet I knew that I was no longer defined by them. I was free to carve my own path, to find my own happiness. As I lay in bed that night, the city lights casting a gentle glow through the window, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had faced my fears, confronted the people who had hurt me, and emerged on the other side stronger for it. And as I drifted off to sleep, a lingering thought crossed my mind, a subtle twist to the resolution. What if Caleb and Marissa's downfall was just the beginning? What if their actions had set off a chain of events that would ripple through their lives, forcing them to confront their own demons? The thought was both unsettling and oddly satisfying, a reminder that justice and karma had their own way of unfolding. Whatever happened next, I was ready to face it with courage and resilience. In the end, my journey had been about more than revenge or justice. It had been about finding myself, about learning to value my own needs and desires. And as I closed my eyes, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, possibility, and the promise of a brighter future.